Hello, folks, and welcome to Totally Tanked, the Tankiest podcast in Tankville. It's Saturday, September 7th, 2024. This is episode 62. My name is Rob this time, and I'm joined by...
Hello, I'm John, and welcome to the Tanktainment Answer to Wayne's World. And what tank are we doing today? Why, it's the wonderful world of post-war heavies, as an arms race was broken by the material limits of steel and tactical bridging. Now, just for some quick housekeeping, if you want an excellent Totally Tanked t-shirt, beer coaster, coffee mug, or cool hat, head over to redbubble.com and search for Totally Tanked. Now, it's not a usual focus on one tank this episode, but a bunch of them that never saw combat and only had a prototype or two ever built, or were never even finished, but they were all the end of the line for what they were.
So, what tanks are we covering today? Well, today we're looking at the Western Allies' early, late, post-war heavies, super heavies. We'll do the Axis and Soviet ones in their own episode another time. So today we have the TOG, the Tortoise, the T28, the AMX50, and the Swedish EML. So we don't all drown in numbers and stats and everything. We'll go over each of the stats and development of each tank before moving on to the next one. Also, due to a family emergency this week, I haven't had quite as much time as I'd like to flesh things out. So please enjoy the episode for what it is. Anyway, straight into the TOG 1 and TOG 2. So think Thing 1 and Thing 2 from Dr. Seuss.
Now, just quickly, Jamie Stokes is not being shy. G'day, Jamie. Good to see you. Anyone else on the feed, do drop us a little comment letting us know. I think Jamie's in South Australia.
And feel free to jump in the poll whether or not they are super awesome or super stupid. All right, so TOG 1 and TOG 2. Right. Type, super heavy tank. Number, built, one of each. Mass, 80 tons. 80 tons, John.
Yep. Big boys. Big boys.
Length, 10 meters, 10.1 meters long, 3.1 meters wide, and 3 meters tall. The TOG 1 had a crew of 8. Commander, gunner, loader, driver, 4 sponson gunners. So it had side sponsons because you can't have a proper tank without side sponsons. And hello to Brandon Make Stuff and Oblong Lemon.
Sounds perfect. That's how you want a lemon, oblong.
Yeah, that's right.
Great improvement.
Right. Well, TOG 2 had a crew of 6, sometimes 7. Commander, gunner, 2 loaders, and a driver and a co-driver. So TOG 1 had 62 mils of armour, and the main armament of the 75 mil howitzer in the hull. So I think the Char 2B, and a 2-pounder in the turret, with side sponsons with 7 machine guns inside sponsons. They even had one version of side sponsons that had a 2-pounder and a Beezer machine gun in it, so you could have lots of Dakar and boom, and away you go.
I mean, the trouble is the 2-pounder was early war a great anti-tank weapon, but I'm not sure that's what you want in a sponson now. But yeah, anyway.
TOG 2 had much more armour. They had 114 mils of armour on the front, and the turret only had, and the hull had 76 on the sides in the hull, and 50 mils on the rear of the tank, with cemented armour. So they just whacked some more cement on there.
No, so cemented armour is referring to a way of making steel armour.
There you go. So. All right. With half an inch of mild steel. It was armed with a quick-fire 17-pounder main gun. And
now, just quickly, because we haven't touched on this in a while, when you see QF or quick firing in British parlance, it is not actually a reflection on how fast it fires, although it might. It just means it's a single piece of fixed ammunition, which in the case of the 70-pounder, it's a really big fixed.
Which is why you have 2 loaders.
Yeah. So QF just means they're not putting multiple parts of the round together in the gun before they fire.
There you go. All right, and a Beezer machine gun. Plus, they were designed with Beezer machine gun side sponsons. Both had the Paxton Ricardo diesel engine, 12, with driving an electric generator for 600 horsepower. So you had a diesel engine driving the electric generators, which is then turning your road wheels.
But a 600 horsepower tank at that stage of the war is actually some decent output for a British tank.
And the reason why it was so long is because that's what they had. That's the limited. It was not a small engine. That's why it had to be so long. It's 10 meters long for the hull. Which meant that to fit all that in, it was a really big engine. That's why that was so long. All right.
But diesel electric does solve a lot of torque problems.
Yes.
Because you just pump the volts down the wire, and then the electric motors don't have a lot of problem with torque. So instead of trying to do a manual, gear transmission, which would have been quite awful for at the time, it was a really smart solution. And diesel electric is something. I mean, a lot of trains still use it today.
And it did have a habit of catching fire, similar to the Porsche Tiger, which also started out with a diesel electric engine. TOG 1 had unsprung suspension with the tracks running outside the hull, much like the old Mark IV or even the Char B1. Whilst TOG 2 had unsprung torsion bar suspension with side skirts looking much more like a Matilda 2. So we'll see that in some, sure, in the photo gallery somewhere.
I think we've only got one TOG picture in the whole lot, but yeah.
All right, operational range, 50 miles, 80 kilometres.
Which is about 40 miles more than it needed for its role. But, yeah.
All right, TOG 1 had a maximum speed of 14 kilometres an hour. I'm not sure. Then, while TOG 2, with a better transmission and tracks and so forth, had a maximum speed of 13.7 kilometres an hour achieved, or a theoretical 24 kilometres an hour. So maybe.
I mean, drop it down a coal mine and go quicker than that.
I did see some good testing videos of TOG 1 where I was able to turn on the spot, and it moved around the testing grounds pretty well.
I mean, you got to remember there is this narrative that the old gang, which gave TOG its name, were dinosaurs of the last war who weren't ready for the modern blitzkrieg. But more to the point, they were specifically trying to make a breaching tank for attacking heavily fortified lines. And to say that, that was the last war is not true, because there were many heavily fortified lines in World War II that took significant breaching efforts. TOG was just, I think, more than anything, too much resources for something that could be better replaced with an engineering vehicle.
Yeah. Anyway, I love a quote from one of the YouTube videos I watched. It said, "It's simply glorious. It's large and powerful, and when it moves, the world pays attention. The sheer size is representative of might and breadth of the British Empire, and while it might not be the most ferocious of fighting instruments of war, it definitely commands respect, even amongst its enemies." But enough about David's mustache. Let's talk about the TOG.
Yeah.
I thought that was a cracker of a comment, and I just had to share it.
It's referring to David Fletcher of the of Tank Museum fame.
Yep. And for those that don't know, the name TOG is derived from the old gang, referring to the chaps at the War Office who designed the tank, most of whom have been part of the 1916 Land Ships Committee during World War I. And they certainly looked the very model of a land ship. World of Tanks even had a boat version of the game built where you drive a TOG 2 ships around in the water, blatting away at each other. So the old gang included Sir Albert Stern, Sir William Triton, Sir Eustace Tennyson, Danecourt, Sir Ernst Swinton, Harry Ricardo, and Walter Wilson. I'm sure there's a couple more sirs or colonels in there, but anyway.
Some OBEs, I suspect. Yeah.
And surprisingly, these gentlemen designed a tank for the mud trenches and shell craters of World War I.
Which I dispute, but yes.
That's what they were designing for. Look, and it would have achieved all those things across a 16-foot trench gap. And
I still think when a tank is this big and slow, it becomes a magnet for heavy fixed artillery, and that's a problem that never solved.
And that's shown in World of Tanks quite a lot as well.
Okay.
The TOG 1 prototype was delivered in September of 1940, but suffered numerous issues in testing. There are some wonderful silent YouTube videos of the testing done showing the ability to pivot steer on the spot and cross obstacles. However, the tank required a redesigned fluid drive to the tracks, which took until 1943, which still wasn't satisfactory, after which it was sent to Chobham and never heard of again. On cold, dark nights, you can sometimes hear the mournful call of the TOG 1 lost on the moors. I'm assuming there's moors at Chobham. There's moors everywhere in England, isn't there?
Yes, it feels that way.
So basically, they don't know what happened after it was set to Chobham. We're assuming it was probably made a range target and blown up.
I would guess sold as scrap metal. If it was a range target, they would have spent something to retrieve. Yeah.
Anyway, the TOG 2 prototype was delivered in March of 1941. With the next month, an inquiry was put forward and say, would you like 100 of these built? And then 2 months later, they said, well, what about 50? Would you like 50 of these built? But no production orders were made. The initial version only had a 6-pounder gun in the turret and side sponsons with a base machine gun and 2-pounder gun, along with a 75mm howitzer in the hull. In 1942, the turret of a Challenger tank with a 17-pounder was installed on the TOG 2.
No, so that's an earlier Challenger, not the famous one. But
no,
yeah.
yes, that was the... and the side sponsons were removed from the prototype. This is the tank that is now in Bovington. They admit that the very few people had an interest in the TOG 2 until it made it into World of Tanks, where it's hugely long size and massive hit points. In particular, British character made it a fan favourite.
See, I reckon Lindy Beige predated this with his video about the TOG 2, back when Lindy Beige was interesting. But
I had a good interview with Joe McDonald again the other day.
He did, yes.
I've gotten onto Joe's battle blog since then, and it's always it's interesting looking at the life of the man on the front lines.
But, you know, I mean, I still like a lot of what Lindy Beige does, but and he's used to be very heavily tank leaning.
Because he found that those worked well.
Yeah, but I'm just saying his output in the last few years has not been what it was.
He might have been changing tacks. Yeah. Anyway, 1943 it was decided that the Churchill would perform the function of a slow-moving tank heading across the battlefield, the World War I battlefield, just as well as the TOGs. And the TOG went no further, just because the Churchill was much cheaper to make and much more
generally useful,
and
particularly the AVRE
blisteringly faster as well.
Yeah, but the Churchill AVRE with its flying dustbin, 25 kilogram high explosive warhead
would clear your obstacles quite nicely.
Yeah.
All right, and from there we head on to the Tortoise. Type it was an assault gun, designed in 1944, produced from 1945 to 1947. 6 of them were built. It wasn't 80 tons, it was 78 tons.
Long tons, though.
Yeah. I'm not even going to get...
I can never figure out different sorts of tons. They're all roughly the same. Just go with it.
Yeah, that's what I'm just make these numbers up. Yeah. Long tons, short tons, 79, 80 to 7.
I've got to say, when I ran across the Tortoise at Bovington, it made a big impact. And they didn't... It was just like, a little sign that said Tortoise and no more explanation. It was sort of up the back. And it's like, hang on, this is the most impressive looking tank here. It and Black Prince. Neither of them actually useful tanks, but boy, it's impressive to look at. And like any assault gun with no turret, there's just something cool about the way the gun builds into them. But yeah.
Brandon's saying my frying pan is probably made from melted top. There you go. You must be able to
Could well be.
All right, so length. It was 32 feet, so again, another 10 meters long. 7.4 meters long hull, so that was the length was including the gun forward. Almost 4 meters wide and 3 meters high. It had a crew of 7, which is commander gunner, 2 machine gunners, and 2 loaders, and the driver.
It's an interesting thing. A lot of heavy tanks, you'll get the 2 loaders, which seems kind of sensible.
Yeah.
But then when you look at modern tanks with 120 mil guns, like you just do it yourself.
Yeah, but I think they're the rounds nowadays, even though they're just as long and big, they may not be
a bit less brass, maybe.
Yeah, because you're not firing hard, just a solid round, a solid shot, or whatever it is, solid piece of steel to penetrate the armor.
True.
All right, armor, 7 to 9 inches, so 178 to 228 millimeters.
It's getting into warship territory, and a heavily armored warship at that.
Yeah. Even 33 mils on top and an inch underneath, because they wanted to protect it against mines as well from blowing up from underneath. All right, main arm was a 32 pounder, so 94 millimeter gun, which is why you needed the 2 loaders, even though even then they had 2-part ammunition.
Oh, they went to it later. Originally, it was a QF, quick firing gun. Yep. Okay.
So I heard somewhere that it was actually started out as like a 37 pounder gun, and they just put a smaller round in it, even though it was the same diameter. So
okay,
I couldn't find another reference to that after at the end of this week, after everything else was happening. So I said, we'll see whether or not I put that in there. Anyway, in the top turret, they've got a Baser machine gun. They've got twin Baser machine guns in a turret in a cupola / top turret, and another one in a ball mount in the hull, in the bow gunners.
Right.
Yeah. So it wasn't coax because it was because it only had the, what do you want to call it? It's not even a ball mount main gun. You just don't have coax for that. Because anyway.
Sure.
Yep. The Rolls-Royce Meteor engine, V12, 650 horsepower. 6 speeds forward and reverse, which meant, and with its Merritt Brown transmission, it could go
old Merritt Brown.
It could go as fast backwards as it could forwards, which that's when we get to it. 140 kilometer range and blistering speed of 20 k's an hour on road or 6 k's an hour off road. It did not deal with broken terrain terribly well.
Sorry, I was trying to
Yeah.
set up the next video. Yep. Okay.
All right.
So the design and development, it's worth noting that it's a heavy assault gun, but still a tank in UK service, unlike the US, who had stricter rules as to what a tank was. Specifically designed for clearing fortifications of the Siegfried Line, also known as the West Wall. The Brits went through 18 designed, but eventually settled on number 16. The other designs were pretty wacky with flamethrowers, machine gun anti-tanks, multiple main guns, multiple machine gun cupolas, front and rear facing. The final design had a 32-pounder gun, twin beasts of machine guns in cupola, and a single bore mount in the hull. All were designed with the idea of 60-40, 60% of the arm on the front and 40 on the rest of the tank, which I'm not sure if it's exactly what the rest of the world's followed since, but the idea of,
Putting all your arm
front towards enemy,
yeah. All right. Now, including as I said before, on the bottom to protect from landmines. The AT-16, which was the design that got the nod, was started at 60 tons, but ended up at 78 tons because why not? Now you might say that with 18 designs put forward, the Nuffield organisation, who was designing it, might have been trying to make work for themselves as the other tanks weren't getting made at that stage.
We know my theory that the Nuffields were just trying to do whatever would make the Germans win.
Yeah, so they could keep getting paid and keep staff on the roster. But eventually the AT-16 was approved, and in February 44, an order for 25 tortoises was made with no need for a prototype to be in use by September of 1945. In the end, only 6 were made. Possibly 12 hulls were cast, but the other 6 were probably melted back down as unusable. It also helps to have Winston Churchill's son-in-law on the design team because nepotism is real, and increases your chances of getting of success greatly by having somebody in charge, in power, making decisions.
It's also just that son-in-law's going round for dinner on a Sunday night, and Winston's saying, "How's work going on that super big tank?" And you don't want him saying, "Oh, I'm being held up by bureaucrats in Whitehall. They've got no clue. They're holding us back." You're always going to make sure this guy's got what he thinks he needs. It's just the way of the world.
And lack of a turret does not make it a tank destroyer or a self-propelled gun, as they were operated by the Royal Artillery, not the tank regiment. So that's one of the things to note about it. Among the 18 versions, that there were many different road wheel configurations. They had a single wheel, then 3 double bogies, or 4 double bogies and 1 single wheel, or 1 single wheel, then 3 double bogies, and so on. So there's lots of different, those 18 designs, there was lots of different ways of putting it forward.
Which is all about the weight distribution and how the weight gets handled. And until you build it and start testing it, you're not going to know.
So even at 78 tons, it was fairly reliable with a Merritt Brown transmission. For ease of transport, it had narrower transport tracks that could be fitted after removing the side skirts and the outer bogies. This would allow it to be loaded on trains and fit on Bailey bridges and other standard road widths. All right, so, and the tanks that were made were given the numbers P1, P2, P3, 4, 5, 6. P1 is the tank at Bovington, a mild steel prototype with the shell loading ports removed.
That's disappointing.
It is in running condition.
They
got it up and going for the 2011 Armageddon tank parade, whatever. P2 was held at Bovington. Tankfest, that's it. P2 was held at Bovington, I think, until the 80s, and then it was scrapped. P3 was used as a target in Dorset, again, somewhere out in the moors. P4 and 5 were sent to British Army on the Rhine and used for testing of roads and bridges to see how heavy a tank you can take on them.
That's a really good idea.
You'll find out later that most of these super heavies, their role became, let's figure out what happens if we put really heavy things on things that need to be able to hold really heavy things. So not only was it figuring out whether or not they were looking at what roads Allied tanks could use through Germany in case the Russians came running through. And of course, that was secret information, because if the Russians were then trying to use roads that couldn't take the weight of a tank, and the Allies were using roads that could take the weight of a tank, then you've got a strategic advantage there.
And of course, every bridge that's rated for 35 tons, of course, can take more. Because if a bridge fell over if a 35-ton bridge fell over with a 36-ton load, people would be upset. But how much more?
Mm.
That's
So they also use them for punching holes in Panthers to make sure they could take on the IS-3. Now remember that name, boys and girls, the IS-3. They probably ended up as range targets in Germany. P5 even had its gun removed and a special ground pressure jack added to it for testing purposes. So yeah, how that all worked, I'm not an engineer, so that's what they did. All right, P6 was taken to Scotland and used as a range target where it still sits. But it can't be moved as it's in a special scientific significant area and would cause too much damage to remove it from that place.
Huh.
Yeah, so it's still sitting out there in the Highlands or wherever it is. I mean, it's in Scotland. I don't say the Highlands. All right, the T28, aka Heavy Tank T28, aka Super Heavy Tank T28, aka the 105mm gun motor carriage T95 or T95, aka the Doom Turtle in World of Tanks or War Thunder type. It's now known as a super heavy tank.
Though, I mean, a 105mm gun in an era where the Soviets were putting 102mm on the 122 on on the IS-2 seems a little undergunned for a super heavy assault gun, doesn't it?
Well, it depends how much bang you get for it.
I mean, for those who are watching on the video feed, the mantlet was insane. As were the tracks. It seems like a lot of tank for a gun that was not that big.
I mean, it was bigger than the 32-pounder.
Sure, but yeah. Anyway, I'm just saying that the Soviets were going around.
It's not the width of the gun; it's how you use it.
Oh, come on, that's not true. Don't know who you've been listening to with that, Rob.
Anyway, it's built by the US, produced in 1945. They only built two. It was 95 tons, winning the game for heaviest super heavy tank. 36 foot long, 14 foot 10 inches wide, 9 feet 4 inches high. Crew of 4. With 12 inches armor on the front. They started out with 8, and then they said, let's just whack another 4 inches. I mean, we'll be right. We just need 12, another 4 inches.
Now, sorry, important to note, in battleships, 12 inches of armor would be considered adequate on a, say, 1910 era battleship. That's a lot of armor to put on a land vehicle.
Yep. All right. It had the 105mm T5E1 gun with 62 rounds in the tank, with a secondary armor of a 50 cal Mardeuse on it. It had a Ford V8 500 horsepower.
500 horsepower on a 100-ton tank.
Yep.
This is a problem.
Gasoline engine. Double track horizontal volute spring suspension with an operational range of 100 miles. Maximum speed of 8 miles per hour. And yes, I make an effort to take out any metric references from American tanks because otherwise they just get confused. And
tanks do get confused.
They do because but I make sure metrics for everybody else, but Americans, they get imperial measurements. All right, design and development. The US, as we were saying before, had much stricter rules on what is a tank. Possibly for funding reasons, as we've seen, Congress likes to only pay for so many tanks at a time, but you can usually sneak a mobile gun platform past them more easily. So the heavy tank T28 started out with the same job as the Tortoise, to be a heavily armored tank, capable of destroying fortifications on the Siegfried line. But when somebody noticed it didn't have a turret, hey, look, 4 sets of tracks. Wait a second, that tank hasn't got a turret. They said it must be a tank destroyer, which can be any configuration, towed, truck-mounted, track-mounted, etc., as long as it can kill a tank. So the Doom Turtle got changed to a 105mm gun motor carriage T95. Then someone else pointed out that tank destroyers in the US were lightly armoured, and this thing had 12 inches of armour. As I said before, it was supposed to be only 8 inches, but thought, well, is that really enough? Let's add another 4 just in case. So in June 1946, so after the war,
battleships, it was armoured as heavily as a battleship.
it was renamed again to Super Heavy Tank T28. Now, tell a little story about the last T28. Whilst doing testing at Fort Belvoir in Virginia in 1947, the T28 broke down. And guess what? There were no recovery assets big enough to get it out of the field, field that it stopped in. So it was covered with camouflage and left in place. And it stayed there as the scrub grew up around it for 27 years. As the chieftain says, T28, super heavy tank, 27-year hide-and-seek champ. And I'll say go ahead and buy the T-shirt and buy one of ours while you're at it.
Yeah, different stores, but just while you're buying T-shirts.
Tank T-shirts, why not?
Yeah.
All right. So it was founded in 1974 when it was finally recovered and restored to be exhibited at the Museum of Cavalry and Armor in Kentucky until it was being moved to Fort Moore in Georgia in 2011. But its trials and tribulations did not end there, as in 2017 it was being moved to a facility for refurbishment. It fell off the low loader it was being transported on.
That would have been a very bad day for the people involved.
And rolled into a ditch. Having failed to negotiate a corner.
At least it was built tough.
Failed to negotiate a corner at the end of a long downhill slope. So that would be something you wouldn't think about.
That would be a really ugly moment, driving a low loader with a priceless, historical, very heavy artifact on the back down a slope that then fell off and rolled. And I imagine there was significant damage to the truck carrying it as well. But
luckily enough, there was no limited damage to the metal monster, and it was repaired. The other T28 was badly damaged by an engine fire at the Yuma Proving Grounds in Arizona, after which it was broken up and sold for scrap. Being sold for scrap is an ongoing occurrence for these things.
Well, there are a lot of steel, and steel is valuable. Pretty much the only place I've ever really encountered in Australia, it's not as voracious, but in the UK, if you leave any sort of bit of steel on the side of a road, someone in a van will come by and grab it immediately. When I worked in cinemas in London in the 90s, we lost a popcorn machine because it had caught fire, and we pushed it out the door to cool down. And then when we came back to see how it was, a steel scrapper had just taken it. And when the steel price drops too low, the steel scrappers stop working, and suddenly cars start banking up on the highways there because they're just used to the steel scrappers taking them away.
There you go.
Yeah.
Right. Now we move on to the AMX 50. It was started out as a medium tank, then it became a heavy tank.
Yep. No one can stuff up a procurement process like the French, but also they deliver really good gear in weird ways. It's
that's pretty
a
much
wonderful thing.
That essentially encapsulates the story of the AMX 50.
Okay.
Right. So mass 57 tons.
Oh, it's a baby.
No, you're not even into the babies yet. 7.3 meters long, 3.4 meters wide, 3.35 meters high. So. Still quite high for what they want.
Well, the reciprocating turret adds
oscillating.
The oscillating turret, yes, does add a bit. Just we talk about the oscillating turret at this moment for those who haven't been here since we did the
Ontos?
No, the AMX
AMX
13.
Yep. And the Ontos.
So the French had quite a brilliant idea that remains quite a good idea. That you can solve all the problems with what they call in gunnery terms return to battery, which is the gun fires and it's a funny angle and you can't put another shell in until it's at an angle where you can.
For those listening, John's waving his hands.
I'm waving my hands around, but
to show various.
But what I'm saying is
elevation
is still valid. And the point is that by fixing the roof of the turret to the gun. And then having the whole roof of the turret move relative to the bottom of the turret, you can build an autoloader, for example, that always has access to the breech.
And a magazine-fed autoloader, so you can always be loading up a new magazine, not having to worry about the autoloader getting jammed or anything else like that. In this case of, it's just like a rifle. If the magazine jams, you pull it out, you put another one in.
Now, Cornelius has joined us. Good to see you, mate. He's got 20 minutes in between his mountain bike riding up at Stromlo Forest. So,
I wonder if he's got the electric bike today or not.
Anyway, okay, let's keep cracking.
All right. Crew of 4, they had 80 to 120 millimeters of armor on the finished last version prototype, and it ended up with a 120 mil SA6 gun with a couple of 7.5 millimeter machine guns, so the French version guns. All right, engine, the Maybach HL295 12 liter with 850 horsepower. They would have liked 1,200 horsepower.
I just like how they went to the Maybach company. You know, you'd think there'd be someone in France who could make a big diesel, but okay.
Yeah, well, they'd all been taken by the Germans by this stage, I guess. All right. Torsion bar suspension, operational range of 250 kilometers,
which is quite long for this era. Yeah.
Maximum speed of 51 k's an hour.
You're joking.
Yep.
Okay.
They wanted 65 k's an hour.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's what they would have wanted with the 1200 horsepower engine.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Design and development. No, France wanted once again to be a tank power and play with the big kids, and so they needed tanks. The ARL 44 covered previously was a start towards being considered in the game of building tanks, but it was not going to do it. As we said, it was a World War I tank design that they tried to keep going after World War II. So they started out with the medium tank M4, naming for success from the start. All right, if you've got a medium tank M4, you're obviously you're already going forward there.
But with a 90mm gun, which is better.
Yeah, so they started out with a 90mm gun. They then built 2 prototypes with the oscillating turrets coming in at 53 tons. To do this, they brought in the masters of tank building, the Germans. They designed it with the Maybach.
Sorry, Rob, I'm going to interrupt you. Sanguinius 5 has joined us saying, "What have I missed?" And the Siege of Terror, buddy. You missed the Siege of Terror. Where were you? Okay.
The planet cracked before the guard.
No, different. That was different. But no, we just to quickly catch up for those joining us, because there are quite a lot of people who come in late here. We've already discussed the American T28, the British TOG series, and the British Tortoise, and we are on to the
Froggies,
the French AMX
50.
Yeah.
So anyway, they brought in the masters of tank building, the Germans, who designed it with the Maybach 295 engine from the Tiger and the Panther. The 295 engine. Then they put in the Tiger and Panther transmission.
That's not good. Why would you do that? Why, of all the tank transmissions in the world, why would you pick these dogs?
I'm getting to those points.
All right.
And also the overlapping road wheels of the Panther and the Tiger 2. So again, the most complicated road wheels you could possibly have. The first design only had 30 millimeters of armor, which was way too low.
Can we compare it to a tank with 12 inches?
It was still a medium at this point.
Okay,
It was going to become a heavy later.
Right, keep going.
The French Army upped the armor to 80 millimeters for these prototypes, which again was still on the very low side.
80 millimeters is good, say, in 1940. But when we're talking post-war, this is still crazy low.
Yeah. It was supposed to be light, well-armed, and above all, mobile. French engineer General Molyneux said it should be a tank with the protection of the Panther, the firepower of the Tiger, the mobility and abundance of the T-34, the reliability of the M4 Sherman, and all that weighing less than the M26 Pershing. That's what they wanted.
This development process went very badly wrong, didn't it?
And the French wanted to be the ones rearming Europe, and saw the AMX 50 as the obvious choice. So they were designing this, saying, look, the Belgians, the Dutch, and the Germans, they'll buy this from us, and we'll be doing the world a favour, and we'll have a magnificent tank building industry that the world will be jealous of. And whilst they had lots of features, whilst the tank had a lot of features with the oscillating turret and the aiming and the autoloader and so forth, they could not overcome the flaws of the tank. The Maybach engine could never produce the level of power wanted, 1,200 horsepower. The Nazis built their large overlapping road wheels due to the lack of rubber, which did not affect the French, because
certainly in peacetime. But,
because they had still had Vietnam providing all the rubber they needed.
It is worth noting and under-remarked that American industry went from the fall of Malaya in 1942, which was making 90% of the world's rubber at the time, to a synthetic rubber industry that could completely replace that in about 6 months. It was incredible. And these days...
they probably already had the chemical stuff ready to go. It's just there was no market for it because there was cheap rubber.
But even rolling it out with the technology already known about it, it was quite remarkable and incredibly important for the war. These days we don't think of rubber as being that important, but in the 1940s,
it was a strategic resource.
Yeah,
the world wanted just like
you couldn't build anything without rubber components in it. Yeah,
just like potassium had been 100 years beforehand type thing.
Well, saltpeter.
Saltpeter,
yeah, for gunpowder. Yeah.
Anyway. So the French could have gone for smaller road wheels, which they eventually did. But these first, again, prototypes, these great big road wheels, and made the tank, the hulls much higher than they should have. As I said before, they were 3.4 meters high, which is way too big for what they were. The oscillating turret was good for magazine-fed autoloaders and armor for volume, and gun elevation was very good. Was no good for nuclear protection, as you cannot seal the two oscillating parts of the turret from the outside environment.
That's just not nuclear. That's also your biochemical weapons.
But at that stage of the game, there were
everyone was thinking about nuclear.
That was the main focus.
And that gets into a whole bunch of design things. Like, I mean, the Centurion has a canvas, huge canvas part of its mantle.
All right, thank you for mashed potato for congratulating me. That was Cadia. Yeah. Yeah, sorry about that. I've forgotten my. I've been long out of my guard
11,000 years of difference there, Rob. But yeah,
I'm out of my guard.
Let's move on from Warhammer and talk about
keep going.
The real tanks.
All right, all right. Another version built was the AMX-50-120 FOC, which was the turretless tank destroyer, which failed to get past the prototype stage. But again, you can find these things in World of Tanks and War Thunder. All right, so back to the original prototypes. The 100mm gun was seen as too small to take on the IS-3 and the T-10 Soviet Heavies, so they installed the 120mm gun.
That's a proper size gun for a super heavy tank.
In the next version, this upped the weight to 63 tons, which was much too high, and which was much too height, much too weight for the hull and for the transmission and the engine and everything else. The hull was then lowered, still really big though, which dropped the weight down to 57 tons. However, during all this happening, the Korean War started, and the US started mass producing the M48, as the M46 and M47 weren't doing it for them. So the M46s and M47s that they did have were then given cheaply to their allies in Western Europe. So France no longer had would-be clients for the tank that they might get around to building some stage before the Soviets invaded.
It reminded me a bit of South Park parodying George R.R. Martin. So, when we build it, it's going to have pizza, and it's going to be better, and it's going to. It's like build it, show us the thing, and then we will buy some. But get it, show us the thing.
One of the 5 tanks was sent to the US for testing at Aberdeen to try and drum up some sales interest, and hoping the Americans could sort out some of the issues the tank was having. One issue was that the autoloader was too fast to be accurate. The rounds put out too much smoke to see through after each shot. So whilst it was capable of firing 15 rounds a minute, it was usually only 2 to 4 rounds a minute. So they went to the US to get smokeless ammo. The US did then try out a few tanks with their oscillating turrets from there. So whilst the prototype was proudly part of the Bastille Day Parade of 1950, the project was fully cancelled in 1959 as heat/shape-charged rounds negated the benefits of the thick armour, and tank mobility became the key until stabilised guns and computerised fire control systems came along. However, the French took a number of innovations from the AMX-50 that they used in the AMX-30. From the videos I've seen, the French like to say that their innovative designs made the tank that they were building obsolete before it was even finished, which is a real glass half full vision of what they achieved. The only one AMX-50 is left, which is stored at the Samoa Tank Museum,
which is also known as the Musée de Blindés. And we definitely do plan to go there one day.
60th. Yeah, you do that for a 60th.
Sure.
Yeah,
okay.
Why not? Let's set goals, man. Set goals.
Okay, just quickly, Mashed Patat was asking, did the Allies have captured examples of things like the IS-3 to know whether or not their guns were good enough? There was a victory parade in Berlin when the Soviets rumbled the IS-3s through it that sent shockwaves.
Scared the what the hell is that thing? Look at the gun on it!
Huge shockwaves. And there is a apocryphal story that Patton leaned over to Montgomery and said, "Don't worry, we're here to protect you." So they didn't have IS-3s, but they did see them and went, "Oh, we've got some problems."
Basically, the Panther was seen as the tank to destroy. If you could destroy Panther, with whatever gun you were using, then you could probably take out any other tank that was going around, because that was seen as the pinnacle of armor protection for tanks.
But as we've discussed a few times now, IS-2 more so than IS-3 was, I would argue, the best tank of World War II. And
for blowing holes and things, yes.
Yeah, well, also just in that it concentrated its armor in an efficient way, and was actually quite a light tank for the tank with the bigger gun and the more armor than anything else, and certainly was very successful.
If you're playing tank trump cards, maybe, but I mean, you want to be saying your combined arms forces your best top tank trump card.
Yeah, you got to make it work with the rest of the stuff. But anyway, yeah, the Soviets were setting a standard, and probably did up until really the M1 was introduced. The Soviets were largely ahead.
That's because that's the only thing they were building successfully during the Cold War.
Yeah. All right.
So the second last AMX 50 was had been at the Tank Museum. Sorry, was sold / stolen by the folks maintaining the collection for scrap. So there was some charges laid for selling that one off as they scrapped it. That happening in the 80s as well.
Speaking of scrap, let's not forget in the 1970s the doors of the biggest dry dock in the UK were stolen for scrap metal. So
Pete's got to tell you he's got Warspite now. So.
Oh, good. Yep. Nice one.
Yep. Yeah, talking about.
We've been playing a lot of World of Warships lately. Yes.
Getting the boats on. All right, the EML, not to be confused with the Nazi.
You call it the EML, not the Emil?
EML.
Okay.
Yeah. Not to be confused with the Nazi Sturder EML, but it was also known as the Kranwagen or Crane Wagon, to keep what they were building secret.
A bit like calling tanks tanks.
Yes, before they were tanks. Or the KRV. It was a heavy tank, designed in 1951, dropped in 1954, mass 28 tons. It was a heavy tank.
It's a baby.
It was still a heavy tank at 28 tons. But then again, when they added the 120mm gun, it went up to that was with the 120mm gun. When they went up to the 150mm gun, then it went up to 40 tons.
Did they ever actually build any?
Mostly. They built them and didn't quite finish them. And they could have finished them if they'd stuck with the design that they said, oh, that'll do. Before somebody came along and said, no, I want it to fly and be invisible and do all this other stuff as well. Anyway, we'll get on to that. Length, 6 meters. How short is that, boys and girls? Yeah, this thing was small. And that's why it was only 28 tons to begin with. And it was still packed a punch. 2.6 meters wide, 2.4 meters tall. So very, very low, very narrow, and very short. Crew of 3, armor, 140 mils. 140 mils on the front hull, heavily sloped. Thin on the very side.
So this is a 1950s tank design?
Yep.
Heavy?
Yep. Yeah, 28 tons. 28 tons.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very and even thinner on the sides and rear. Woo!
Thin on the sides and the rear. So they said, you know what, we're just going to put all the armor on the front. Started out with the 120mm gun, rifled, or they wanted to have a 150mm smoothbore gun.
Now you're talking.
Yeah. Yep. Engine. They only had 500 horsepower engines, which was fine for what they were looking at for the 120mm gun at 28 tons. But the Army wanted 800 horsepower for the 40-ton 150mm gun version. But none were available in Sweden. So, sign of development. A project cursed by feature creep being the enemy of really good, to my mind.
Feature creep is the death of any project. Yeah. And for those not familiar, it's when you can't actually define what you're trying to achieve.
It's a project manager who lives in the cupboard, comes out every once in a while and says, what about portholes? Can we have some portholes?
So the crew can shoot their pistols. Yeah.
And guess what? Sweden also got scared by the IS-3. Are we seeing a pattern here, boys and girls? But didn't hear much about it until much later than everybody else. Because they were neutral, nobody was sharing the intel with them. So even though they probably could have turned up to the Berlin Parade, nobody was telling them, oh, there's this Soviet
I feel like a Swedish defense attaché missed a trick there.
Yeah, they really were late to the game by a couple of years in finding out about the IS-3. And when they did, they said, oh, well, we need a Swedish design to defeat this thing. But once they did find out about the IS-3, they worked with the French. building a new tank to take it on, which is where we get
This is project development hell, isn't it?
This is where we get the links to the AMX50. All right, the French first loaned them a Tiger II as an example of what could defeat an IS-3, and then gave them the designs of the AMX50.
Let's remember Tiger II, and we will soon do a Tiger II episode because we haven't done it yet. It was only an 88mm gun, a very good 88mm gun, but still just an 88 and a lot of armor and a terrible power plant and transmission.
But it was slug armor.
It was curvy, yeah. And, you know, Tiger II is probably my favorite tank to stand next to and get photographed with. Yeah, anyway, continue, please.
Yeah. So the French loaned them a Tiger II and gave them the designs of the AMX50. The tank for the tank that they were building for themselves. The Swedes liked the oscillating turret and decided they'd build a tank of no more than 30 tons, as that was the weight limit of most bridges in Sweden.
The weight limit of most bridges everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. With thick frontal armor and thin sides that could rise up over a hill with excellent gun depression and elevation, let off a few rounds from the autoloader, then quickly reverse back from the crest of the hill. So basically, rise up, blat, run away. And so they came out with a 28-ton tank with a 120mm rifled gun with a twin drum autoloader, allowing selection of different types of ammo.
That's very advanced for that period.
Yep. Yeah, that was a good design. 140mm of heavily sloped front armor, better than the IS-3. A very small profile, low, narrow, and short. The low chassis enabled the 500 horsepower flat engine design that could accelerate the 28-ton vehicle very quickly. So the way that the engine, the flatness of the engine allowed the hull to be so low to the ground as well.
Needless armor.
Yep. All that sort of stuff. So they had a really good design there, all of which was available in Sweden at that time. And a successful chassis prototype was built. So they built it. However, the army then decided they needed a 150mm smoothbore gun just to be sure it destroy any target. No matter what came in front of them, they wanted it dead.
And 150mm smoothbore, assuming you got the right ammo for it.
That's a good point, John. Assuming you got the right ammo for it, which they didn't.
I'm just saying that's a big gun.
It is a really big gun.
It will kill some stuff.
Yeah, they had ammo for the 120mm gun, which then needed the 150mm version. Then needed a much bigger turret, which then increased the weight, needing a 800 horsepower engine, which they didn't have, and a bigger chassis. They also didn't have a 150mm gun or 150mm gun ammo. So the Soviets had already declared the IS-3 obsolete and moved on to the T-54-55, which the 120mm gun was more than enough for. So while Sweden tried and failed to build or buy all the things that they didn't have to fight a tank that had been replaced, rather than use the things that they did have, the project got cancelled in 1954, and they bought Centurions from the Brits, who really needed the money. The Brits really needed the money at that stage, and so that's why they...
And Centurion was a bloody good tank.
It was, but...
At the same time, I mean, Centurion versus 150mm, I would say fundamentally a medium tank. It would have been awesome.
A 28-ton tank with a 120mm gun that could run around at 50 k's an hour, because it was designed for to be the same as the AMX, to the quickness and acceleration.
And literally, I could not get a picture of this vehicle. I had to use a design drawing.
So they, as I said, they built the hull, they built the turret. They didn't have a gun to go in the turret because of the stuffing around, but they built a turret simulator that was a dummy turret that weighed the same, so they could try it all out. So that's where they ended up with that. But they never actually finished it, because they could have, except that, as I said, the feature creep came out and said, we need a 150mm gun.
God damn those creeps.
Rather than both are saying, well, we've got a 120mm gun, we've got 120mm ammo, we can put all this, and we've got a 500 horsepower
And for
engine.
the era, a 120mm gun was actually very advanced.
Huge. And we've got a 500 horsepower engine that will take this 28-ton tank that will go over all our bridges and across all our land at 50 k's an hour at least. Should we just go with that? No, we have to have 150 mils. And to blow up the IS-3, you mean the IS-3 that nobody's using anymore?
To save it's already retired. Yep. Now, long-time friend of the show, Tasman, has joined. So, g'day, mate. I hope things are all going well with the mother-in-law. Okay.
Conflicts, nil.
Mm.
Operators, nil. Because they were only ever prototypes. However, if you really want to say it's the UK, the US, and France, and Sweden. Legacy, don't fight the last war. TOG.
I think that's a touch unfair, and it feeds into the narrative surrounding TOG, when I will still argue the reality was they were given a job, design a vehicle to tackle the Siegfried line or similar. Heavy defensive lines did still exist, and we'll talk about the Siegfried line a little bit when we move on. But anyway, continue.
Right. Super heavies are super heavies are best when needing really heavy things to test the weight limit capacity of engineering designs, bridges, roads, trailers, etc. And don't fight the obsolete tank for the EML, I think.
Yeah, it's let's go back just a touch there, in that, I mean, a super heavy is basically delivered by rail to near the fighting, and there is a specific hardened objective that has to be taken. And the idea is the super heavy will rumble forwards and deliver powerful ordnance without being destroyed because it's got heavy armor. And that is a very specialized role. It's not a main battle tank. You don't take it everywhere. It doesn't do everything. But in war, there are times when you'll wish you had it.
Sorry, I forgot to put in the script all about the T28 and its extra set of tracks.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, I love the track carrier that they had to tow.
It was it's been a difficult time the last couple of days. But the T28 has 4 sets of tracks, of which you take the outside sets of tracks off in order to go across bridges, fit on trains, all that sort of good fun stuff. Otherwise, it would be too heavy. And the way, so there's a long, boring process to do that. But once you take them off, what do you do with this? I don't know, what, 5-ton versus a lot of, or 10-ton, a lot of tracks and bogies. What they came up with was they'd hook them together, and
special trailer, and
give it a tow bar, and the tank would then pull its own tracks, the extra tracks behind it as it moved on. It had a little trolley to come along, come along, tracks, we're going this way.
Now, I imagine there was a lot of cursing and swearing where they had to line this trailer up to feed the tracks onto the onto the sprocket to get it back installed. But you're still better with a dedicated trolley doing that than having to have the poor grunts. Particularly, I mean, these tracks would have weighed, what, at least 5 tons.
Look, I have no idea, but I'm going to make up that number. So that's a good number for me.
Yeah, because 5 tons is around what heavy tracks weigh. And so you're much better off having a trolley that is designed to slot in and feed the track in, and then the tank can pull it around and you hammer the last pin in.
Yeah.
But still, it would have been an awful lot of cursing and swearing every time you had to take the outside tracks off and put them back on.
Well, the Chieftain's video on it said how long it took and what they did with it also. I can't remember how long that was. All right, so there were lots of mentions online comments about how people didn't realise that these were real tanks and not a made-up tank solely for War Thunder or World of Tanks.
Well, when we say real prototypes,
but the thing is, they actually exist.
They're in museums.
They were physically built rather than just being a blueprint tank, which a lot of those tanks are. But and so it was interesting to note that those games actually hugely increased the popularity and knowledge of these things, and then for people to realize, so the knowledge of their online version of these tanks came before people's realization that these were physical things and could be seen at, say, Bovington or Georgia and so forth. And the last thing I'll say, second last thing I'll say for all this is that it's all the IS-3's fault.
I would say it's all the Siegfried line's fault, but the IS-3 definitely has a lot of blame to go around. Yeah.
Now, for those wondering, and I know this is the most important thing for a lot of you.
This is the only thing that we're really here to do. Yeah.
Only the T28 seems to get a role in Girls und Panzer, even though only the EML would possibly fall Emil would fall outside their design rules. Maybe the AMX 52. I guess even Girls und Panzer could not suspend disbelief enough to have TOGs and Tortoises zooming around the battlefield like the other tanks in the manga and the anime.
That'd be kind of cool, though.
I know, it would be very cool, but the fact that they even got the T28 in there, I think it just sits in the movie. It just sits in one place and blats things. But the point is, most of the tanks in the anime and manga are moving around it. supersonic speeds type thing. So anyway.
Now I just want to. Oh, hang on. Brandon Make Stuff says. Okay, sorry. That was a point about his Hilux. Okay, and the mouse and Sanguinus is saying hello. Okay. Oh, hey, Graham from XA Coupe guy. Heading back to Australian Armour Artillery. Yes, Graham, we need to talk about driving tanks. We got some ideas.
I think it goes left stick, right stick, front.
So Graham was driving the M3 around the Osama Fest.
Now, talking about people going off and driving driving tanks, I see that Maximus, Cone of Arc, Sofaline, Chieftain, and Lottie all got invited to the Keynote Tank Weekend in Canada to drive tanks. So I'm wondering where our invite was, but then again, we don't actually have the useful skills to bring along to those.
No, and we're not as famous.
I know, but it'd be nice.
Yeah,
I know, but one day we'll head to that one as well.
We will talk at the end of the show about next year's Osama Fest as well. But anyway, Graham, good to see you online.
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk quickly about a lot of the planning, particularly the British and American super heavies, was based around breaching the German Siegfried Line, which was it stretched from Switzerland to the North Sea and actually stayed within the German territorial borders, which was interesting that even in...
Did that include Alsace-Lorraine?
Well, I'd need to check exactly. But so it was this huge network of fortifications. Also, interestingly, they called their individual foxholes Tobruks. So they were so impressed by the...
I'm assuming after Tobruk rather than beforehand.
Yeah. They were so impressed by, particularly, frankly, the Australian defence of Tobruk that they took this idea of fortified little bastions and it ended the language.
It wasn't the bastions; it was the active patrolling.
Anyway, that's what they called Tobruks. Okay. Yes. So, and this was the Germans called it the West Wall quite often. And this was where all these big heavies were designed to be able to cross the trenches that the Germans had dug. Now, the line was overrun in late 1944 before these tanks could hit the field, but 140,000 US casualties were part of the Siegfried Line operation. That is an enormous human toll. Now, admittedly, casualties is wounded as well as killed, but you know the wounded are going to carry those for their lives if they get counted as a casualty. And you could argue that some super heavy bunker busters to assist with the that breaching could have saved a lot of lives. 140,000 is that's a big war on its own. Anyway, so I thought we'd go with that. Okay, what's happening in the poll, Rob?
Super heavies are super awesome, 62%. Super stupid, 38%. So some of you folks have an idea that these tanks were not super awesome. Now, I don't know how you came up with that idea, but I just don't think it's right. Anyway.
Okay. Anyway, that's what they're doing now. There's plenty of time to vote in the second half of the show. Now we are going to cut to a chat we had with historian, author, and role-playing game sourcebook.
We nerd out a lot.
Yeah. This was one of my favorite chats we've had. Anyway, Russell Phillips, who is a friend of the show, and has done a lot of things that have got conjoined interests. A
lot of source books on armored vehicles, both Western and Soviet or Eastern Bloc.
Yep.
So feel free to go have a look up his stuff. He knows his stuff, and he's put it all together in source books that are available to just be able to say, oh, that is a BMP one something or other, and away you go.
Yep. Anyway, so we hope you enjoy our chat with Russell Phillips. We'll be back in around half an hour to. We've got a lot of stuff in the world of wars and tanks to talk about in the second half. But in the meantime, we really hope you enjoy this chat. So today we are joined by historian and author Russell Phillips, who has a new book out just this week, and has written a lot about Soviet arms and armor, and quite a lot about World War II. But Russell Phillips, welcome to the show.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Now, quickly, because the book is out this week, can you tell us a bit about that, and then we'll talk more about your tank-related interests as we go.
Okay, so the new book has absolutely nothing to do with tanks, I'm afraid. It's a role-playing game source book about the special operations executive in the Second World War, because one of my early role-playing experiences was with Twilight 2000, and I always
we loved
liked
Twilight 2000 back in the day.
I still remember making the characters. Yep, so I'm gonna, before having to actually haul one around, saying, "Oh, take it around a Carl Gustav, 18 kilos." Yes, no worries. Having to then carry one around in real life and say, "Bugger this."
So I always fancied the idea of playing a game set in the Second World War, but of course, like the whole military structure and the ranks and things don't really gel nicely with an RPG group. Of course, Twilight dealt with that. I just like destroyed most of the military.
And the whole of civilization, but it made for a good setting that would last about 6 weeks before everyone died. Yeah,
and gave a really good excuse for having the chieftain tank and the multi-fuel engine. Still remember
That's
that
true,
being in there as well.
But I figured the SOE have the advantage that there wasn't that tight rank structure, and they employed women, which always helps. And it just struck me as a way of doing that, a way of being able to play games set in the Second World War without having to worry about so and so's the like you have to do whatever your superior officer tells you and all that kind of thing. So yeah, that's my latest one.
nice. And tell us more about the equipment of the Warsaw Pact series. You've got quite a lot of books there, and I think that'd be quite interesting to a lot of our listeners. Can you tell us more about that?
I was saying earlier that I'm not much of a war gamer these days, but I used to be. And when I first got interested in Warsaw Pact equipment, I think it was the late 80s, probably like 86, 87, something like that. And it was basically because I was wargaming, and my local club started what we called at the time ultra modern, whereas now it's historical and it's Cold War, like 40 years ago or something. So they pretty much came out of a desire to have a concise single source that I trusted, because I've got piles of Jane's books and David Isby books and things, and I just wanted it all collated in a nice little package rather than all like spread out over masses of volumes. Yeah, I'm just looking over at them at the moment. So there was the first one was tanks and combat vehicles, and to be honest, that got rewritten. I originally wrote a book called Red Steel, which was just Soviet tanks and combat vehicles, and I'd intended for that to just be a one-off standalone. This came out because I read a report in an old British intelligence magazine called Army Technical Intelligence Review. I picked up some copies at Bovington, and it had this long feature about Soviet tank crews training to cross rivers by driving along the bottom of the riverbed with the big snorkel and stuff. And that was really interesting. And on top of that, there was stuff about other bridging equipment and ferries and so on. And so I rewrote Red Steel to include the rest of Warsaw Pact and renamed it. And then I wrote one about combat engineering equipment, and then I wrote one about artillery. And if I ever get back to that series, then I want to do things like infantry weapons and anti-tank weapons and anti-aircraft weapons and so on.
Nice one. Now, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say I might do one about helicopters, but that's a long way down the way.
I mean, the Soviet helicopters of the era are very sexy, but sadly not tank related. On the tank question, if you've done stuff about the amphibious wading capability or the snorkeling, Now, my understanding, but I'm still not entirely 100% sure, is that was really only intended to be a parallel stream to a bridge in a heavily engineered crossing. It wasn't that you could just turn up to the banks of the Danube and stick your snorkel up and hope that you wouldn't disappear under the waves.
No, it was. All my indications are that it would be a very planned thing. Yeah, you couldn't just turn up and drive, because there was all sorts of things that had to be just right. There was like the river current had to be less than something like 5 kilometers an hour, I think. And the bottom of the riverbed had to be solid enough that it would take the tanks. And the approaches had to be gentle enough that you could actually drive down and up. And so, yeah, there was a lot of restrictions and things that you needed. So
and also you needed to know for 100% fact that the enemy hadn't put one single anti-tank trap down the bottom of the river there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
because that seems like a really easy thing to do.
I guess if your sappers have probably got if they got any scuba gear, they would have been plotting it out already and figuring out the terrain under the water. And
I think they did actually have some specialized vehicles. I can't remember the details now, but there were some specialized vehicles for checking out that kind of thing.
Yeah, with the number of books you've got out over the years, what do you think is probably the one you're most proud of?
Oh, that's... Come on, Russell. Who's your favourite child?
Yeah.
I think it has to be a toss-up between two of them, to be honest. There's Operation Nimrod about the Iranian embassy siege, and A Strange Campaign about the battle for Madagascar. Neither of them feature very many tanks, but there are some on Madagascar.
No, that's the thing, is we covered the Tetrarchs that were flown in there, and there was some of the French tanks that were already there. I can't remember. Oh, there was the not Cardinaloid, the British 6 tons that were there, or something like that, being used by the French. Maybe.
No, I don't think they had armored cars.
Yeah, they had armored cars, but anyway, the Tetrarchs were flown in, and something else was brought in as well.
There were Tetrarchs and Valentines for the British.
That's the Valentines. That's what they.
But they were brought on ships. The Tetrarchs didn't fly in.
The Tetrarchs never flew anywhere, did they?
That was one of the things that interested me about Madagascar. When that's a bit of a tangent, so I'll leave that for a second. But it was the one time that they were actually used as light tanks rather than airborne tanks, which is what they were originally designed to do. But that's I first got interested in Madagascar because my wife wanted to do a children's book about a tank, and so she came to me. She said, so she wanted it to be a proper historical tank, not just a generic thing. And she said, so I want a small tank, but I want it to look like a tank, so I want something small, but looks like you expect a tank to look. So I had a bit of a think about this, and I was like, Tetrarch, that's the one you want. So she wrote a kid's book about a Tetrarch. And because of that, I was looking into Tetrarchs, and I think prior to that, I hadn't even realised there'd been a fight on Madagascar, and that got me started on a rabbit hole. And it's a fascinating campaign, to be honest. There's all kinds of little oddities and little weird things that went on there.
I mean, just the aspect of the naval control of the Indian Ocean. Once Singapore fell and the Japanese Navy were into the Indian Ocean, Madagascar was going to be if it was not held by the British and the Allies, then the Japanese could have been setting up bases there and causing havoc everywhere. And there wouldn't have been a lot to stop it with most of the Commonwealth shipping being tempting targets from because they couldn't go through the Mediterranean. So logistically, it was a very important point with the fall of Singapore and the retreat of Empire Navy out of the Indian Ocean.
Absolutely, and it was under the control of Vichy France at the time, and they'd previously handed over bases to the Japanese in the Far East. So there was a fear that if the Japanese went to Vichy France and said, we want to be able to base our ships in Diego Suez, and Vichy would just go, yeah, fine, we don't care. And they, if I remember rightly, the authorities on Madagascar did have instructions that if the Japanese wanted to base any ships there, then they were to allow them to do so.
There's a very particularly Australian citation which gets applied to this. 2 regiments who earned it and a bunch of individual soldiers that they fought all the king's enemies, and Vichy France is one of the king's enemies you needed to have fought, and you know, there's probably 600 or 700 soldiers who earned it, and it'll be on their tombstones that, you know, fought all the king's enemies. But yeah, it's to today. It's like, what do you mean France? We didn't fight France in World War II. They were on our side.
we Australians fought them all over the bloody place. And,
yeah, we did. Yeah.
Syria. And,
if you want colonial
North
fighting,
Africa.
who do you send in? Now, Russell, tell us more about your wife's book about a tank. I think it deserves a more.
I was about to say, it sounds fascinating because it's not on your list of books, so I haven't seen it.
No. So this came about because my son had always liked trains, and so there was a lot of we had all the Thomas the Tank Engine books and things, and my mum always referred to Thomas the Tank Engine as Thomas the Tank. And I said to Jen, like, somebody ought to write a kid's book about Thomas the Tank.
I literally have a Thomas the Tank T-shirt that I should have been wearing today if I'd known this was going to come up. But
I think
please continue.
Is it a Sherman with the Thomas?
Yeah.
I've got the exact same T-shirt.
I think I might have 2 because people keep giving it to me.
So Jen decided to take me up on that challenge. She gender flipped it. So it's actually Tessa the Tank. And it's all like the story is basically that Tessa lives at Fretwell Tank Museum, which is very much based on Bovington. That was the idea, but we didn't want to use real places. So it's Fretwell Tank Museum in the South Riding of Yorkshire, because there's never been a South Riding. So it's all. And she's going to a classic vehicle show, and they put her on this tank transporter called Brian, and they set off, and Tessa and Brian are talking, and Tessa's talking about I went to France once, and Brian's like, oh, well, things like me, you wouldn't have got anywhere. I took tanks all over the place. And he loses concentration, goes through a fence into a field, and breaks down. So then Tessa has to tow him to the classic vehicle show. And when she gets there, she's all apologetic because she's mucky, and the girls running it's like, that's fine, you're a tank, a bit of mud is not out of place. And yeah, that's basically the plot. It's it's a kid's book. It's aimed for 6-8-year-olds, something like that. So it's not very long. It's not exactly a detailed plot.
No, that's fair enough, but a significant number of our audience might want a tank-themed book for their children. So where can they get it?
It's certainly available on Amazon. It is available as an ebook as well as a paper, but I think kids generally prefer paper. It's probably available elsewhere. I honestly don't know. But if you search for Tessa the Tank.
Tessa the Tank. Okay, that's what they need to look for. No, that's useful information. All right, now just a question on how, going back to your source book about the Cold War, and I was interested. You were describing Soviet hordes, not hordes. That was my word, not yours. But large Soviet unions, attacking smaller but better equipped NATO units, which is an interesting thing to think about prior to the post-Yom Kippur realignment, when the Western Allies got more serious about conventional warfare. But it's agnostic to game systems. So how do people go about taking a source book like that and actually applying it to, what game system would you recommend they use if they picked up something like that?
when I was playing a lot of Cold War games, we used Challenger and Challenger 2, but by the time I was playing, I decided that they were just too complicated for me. When we first started using them, the feeling was that they were realistic. And the thing that
young men with lots of time can come up with a lot of complicated and detailed maps to do everything.
Yeah.
And as you get older and you have less time and less space to be able to spread out your maps and your tokens and everything else, it gets you want something a bit simpler.
But realism is the enemy of fun too often as well. You want something that doesn't strain reality too much, but you don't care about that 15th rivet at the end of the tank and whether it's been properly hammered in, do you?
Yeah, the thing, and to be honest, the thing that I distinctly remember it even now, the thing that turned me off Challenger finally was that, and there was the fact that you had to choose what kind of round your tank was going to fire, and bear in mind that these were, according to the book, they were designed for like up to a regiment on the side. You know, like there's a lot of tanks, and the idea that you need to decide whether the loader is going to choose APF, SDS, or heat is a bit ridiculous at that point. But I was watching again. A friend of mine was playing, and he was going to fire at a little lightly armed thing, with a big gun. I can't remember exactly what they were, but he was going to fire heat because that was the right. Like that's what you fire in that situation. And I said to him, "Don't do that. Fire AP because that will definitely kill it." And he's like, "No, but AP could like just go in one side and out the other. It's so lightly armed." Yeah, I'm like, yes, but in the rules, AP will kill it and heat might not. And as soon as I said that, I thought, what's the point of all this complexity? I can't even go.
Which also ignores that heat is a slow round and AP is a fast round, and also, when you put a hole in a tank, it tends to suck everything through. But yeah, that's anyway. That's me adding a whole other level of nerdiness that I've picked up along the way. The slowness of the heat round is not something I ever appreciated until literally just the last episode. So it just goes to show we can always still learn.
Oh yeah, that's something I picked up. Oh, like, do you remember the Microprose computer games?
Yeah, I mean, in theory, I must have played some. Yeah,
I remember seeing
because I had the M1. I think it was M1 Tank Platoon or something on my Amiga, and I distinctly remember from that one that it made the point that if you fired heat, it was quite a yeah. Whereas if you fired AP, it was very straight. So that but as far as rules are concerned, these days, I'm a big fan of simplicity, and some years ago I discovered a PZ8. They're called. I've no idea what PZ8 means or whatever, but there's a bunch of them. I think there's a Second World War set and a Cold War set, and I think there might be ones for like sci-fi or something like that. But they're like 2 pages, and they work. And it's easy and it's quick, and yeah, it's now that I'm in my 50s, like that's the kind of thing I want.
Sorry, what's the name of that one again for
PZ8?
folks who want to try?
PZ8.
PZ8, and you that'd work well with your source materials.
Yeah.
Nice one.
If I remember rightly, I got them from the Free War Games Rules website.
Great. Now, if someone wants to start reading your books, where would you recommend they start? And can you tell us about that one?
I think I would probably recommend starting with The Strange Campaign or Nimrod. One of those two.
The Strange Campaign is Madagascar.
Yeah.
And what's Nimrod about?
Operation Nimrod is the Iranian embassy siege in 1980. Okay. So they're very different books. So it's really which one's going to float your boat more.
I like the way in your Operation Nimrod one, you call out that the SAS had been acknowledged by the government previously. It just hadn't really made it, and hadn't made it into the press a whole lot before then. And yes, this is really their first outing in the mainstream press, I guess.
Yeah.
And
there's
whereas
a whole
dispelling the myth of that this is the first time they'd ever been mentioned type thing in the secret organization.
Yeah. And there's a whole load of myths around the SAS, which I guess, like, it comes with the territory, because, like, they are quite secretive. They don't shout too much about what they do, but yeah, there's so many myths around them, and there's the siege, and I also mentioned in the book that there's this idea that during the siege they were removing bricks from a wall to give them an entry point, and it's complete rubbish.
But I mean, not everything ever written about the SAS is rubbish. That's obviously a grossly oversweeping generalization. But I mean, so much of the World War II stuff was, I mean, my reading of it was they were a joke formation made to fool the Germans as a order of battle, and then they got bored and started trying to actually do things, and had to be rescued by the Long Range Desert Task Force numerous times until they figured out how to do things.
That's, and like the Second World War SAS, I'm not as genned up on, but it's certainly true that I think their first although I should mention, because I'm currently researching my next book, which will be about the first British airborne operation, and before they became and initially they were known as either the Special Air Service or the Special Service, which meant that for a while they had the initials SS, which seems rather unfortunate, and nobody seems to pick up on it.
It seems like they added air just to get away from that, doesn't it?
That's why they started jumping out of planes in the middle of desert sandstorms, so they can get away from it, I guess.
But so that was like 1941, so it was before the whole thing in the desert. I know, like, the first operation in the desert with David Sterling in charge, it was a complete disaster. And yeah, I think there was a certain amount of teething troubles until they worked out how to do things.
Now, one of the books that really jumped out from me of yours was the one about the Welsh miners in taking on the remembrance of the town of Ledici, however you want to pronounce it properly, in Czechoslovakia, and how it was wiped out by the SS, and how this Welsh town said, "We are not going to let their memory pass away. We are going to remember them," and how the SS had murdered basically everybody in the town and tried to wipe their existence from the map. That really stood out for me as a book that has a greater meaning than just history of saying we will not let them just be the Nazis force them out of existence. We will remember them, even though we are on 1,000 miles away, or however far it is, and we have no relationship to them, except we are also a small mining town, and we are going to remember.
I do need to correct you that it was the Stoke-on-Trent miners that started it.
There you go.
Because I found out about it because I'm living in Stoke-on-Trent these days, and yes, miners from all over.
Sorry,
people
right.
from all over the world.
I knew it was miners, and I always associate miners in the UK as Welsh. Sorry about that.
We're more than just miners.
That's my biases coming through.
There's certainly plenty of mines in Wales. And similarly, I always think of miners as South Yorkshire because that's where I'm from, and I was brought up in a mining village. But yeah, I only found out about that because I went to a local museum with my son, and somebody had rediscovered the story because it had been forgotten in Stoke-on-Trent for years, and somebody local had just seen mention of it in some book somewhere and thought, I've never heard of that. That's so they started looking into it, and then there was a concerted effort to raise awareness and make people aware of this thing that local miners had done. And so this one basically came up to us and was like, she gave us a very quick potted overview and then said, "Would you like to see a film about it?" And we're like, "Yeah, of course." And my first thought was that it was like I would do a Siglain, like another one of those. But the thing that struck me about it was that it was so total. Like they, I would do a Siglain is like it's a shell now, but the Ditsa was left as absolutely nothing. They bulldozed the buildings, took the rubble away, dug up the remains of the corpses in the churchyard and took them away, and then landscaped the entire area. And so there was just, when they were done, it was just fields, and there was no suggestion that there'd ever been a village there. And it was that's what struck me, that it was so total. It's horrific to do something like Odo Siglain where you kill everybody in the village. That's a horrendous thing to do. But to then just try and wipe out all, and Hitler said that he wanted the memory of the Ditsa to die, and that's just a whole other level.
Yep, it's fantastic that they made the effort to defy that determination. We're going to have to wind up in a second. Before we let you go, Russell, can you tell us what your favorite tank is, and tell us why?
Oh, Lord, I am.
There's a little tank that could.
I am terrible with favourites. I really am. Like, if you ask me this again tomorrow, I'd probably give you a different answer. But I've always had a soft spot for the Tetrarch. Like, I think that's probably the one. But oh God. But if you're going to allow things that aren't really tanks, then I have to say that the turreted FV432 is. I drove one of those at Armageddon, so that has to be up there. And I like the Scorpion and the Scimitar. All that whole range of CVRT.
CVRT is short-wheel-based recon vehicles that are fun to drive, bounce around, and do a bit of just take them around on the road and away you go. But you reckon the FV432, the Warrior series?
Well, the FV432, like I said, it's Armageddon, which is a local. I say local; it's a couple of hours away. They do paintball battles with turreted FV432s, and they also do driving days. And I went along for one of their driving days, so I got to drive one. And I think the British Army originally made like 13 of them. They just, if I remember rightly, it's the old 432 armored personnel car, and they put a Fox turret on it. And there were only like 13 of them, all in the Berlin Brigade. And Armageddon bought them all to use for the paintball battles. And then and since then they've converted a load more. And when I went for my driving day, I was really quite pleased that the one I got to drive was one of the original Berlin ones. So yeah.
Now I've got to ask, because I'm someone who's been hit by a lot more paintball rounds than I've ever hit anyone else with. What's it like being hit by a paintball round from a tank? That sounds almost terminal.
I think I didn't do the paintballing. I just did the driving.
Okay,
but I believe the paintball battles are basically between turreted 432. So like they're
buttoned up. All right, so they don't have people running around.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the commanders don't have their heads sticking out, ready to get splattered by a fist-sized paintball, I'm guessing.
Because like I don't know whether it's the different gun or whatever, but like looking at it, it looked about the right size. So you're like, it's 30 or 40 mil caliber. It's going to be a hell of a paintball.
Yeah, and they don't tickle, even when they're non-lethal. But
yeah.
Anyway, Russell, thank you so much for joining us. And if people want to find out more about you, it is russellphillips.uk. Has everywhere they need to go. And You've been very, very generous sending us videos and pictures recently, which have been included in the show. So we'd like to thank you for that. And
you're welcome.
Yeah. Rob, anything else you want to...
No, I just wanted to say thank you very much, Russell, and I'm going to look forward to trying to incorporate some of your role-playing game suggestions and books into upcoming campaigns and see how that goes.
Brilliant. Thanks for having me on.
And we are back, and it is time to thank our patrons. Also, thank you to Russell Phillips for that fantastic interview that we enjoyed immensely. Hope the audience did as well. So in terms of patrons, our Artificer tier, which is our top tier, we have Brian Jenkins, Biframe, Chris Pezet, Cornelius Weber, Ian McGuinness, Jonathan Markle, Johnny Oot, Maxi Mixed, and Pear. And then at the other tier, we have Anton Gorbanov, Carter Heller, Christoph Keller, Dan Sapienza, David Mulvaney, Elliot Spicer, Floaty Bird, Guy Hook, Hans Wang, Henry Hamerde, Jay Beckman Strauss, Jamie Stokes, Late Apex, Major Mansfield,
Russell Phillips,
Scotch 12, Steve Matthews, Tony L, and Vikram Murphy. And thank you, Vikram, for your support and telling us to do Patreon, because that's been really good.
John, did you have any idea what we might do for a beer review for this episode? Can you tell me?
No, I have no idea what you've done for the beer review.
All right, so boys and girls, you'll have something a bit different because we're doing an episode about American, Swedish, French, and UK tanks. So what beer are we going to do? You'll never guess it. It's the Gulden Drak.
Right.
Imperial,
my God.
Imperial Stout.
Imperial Stout. Gulden Drak. Where's it from?
Who knows? I can't remember. But the main point is 12%. It is a heavy. It is a super.
It's a
heavy
super
beer.
heavy beer.
It's a super heavy beer. So that's what we've gone for, boys and girls. It's a super heavy beer. So it's got a dragon right on the bottle. The Golden Drak.
Okay,
so it's got a cork. It's got a cork in it. I'm hoping it's not going to blow off.
Point it that way.
Yep. And now, that's not a champagne cork. That's good.
Yeah. There was a time I drank the Montreal very heavy beer that came with a champagne cork, Le Fin de Monde, and I woke up on the floor of an apartment that I did not know.
Aussie, go home. It's know your house. It's know your house.
Everyone was very nice. It all worked out.
And I've been with people who've had that shut at them because they wandered into the wrong house and fell asleep on the couch.
Yeah, well, we can talk to Sheridan about that. Anyway, let's not get ourselves in any more trouble.
Yes.
Yes, we have these enormous, super heavy black stouts, which Rob will read the label and find out where it's from. Okay.
Golden Drak Imperial Stout is EN limited edition in Het Gamma Vandely Gulden. Oh, crikey, who knows?
Sounds Belgian.
Extra strong Belgian beer. There we go.
There we go. Yeah.
There we go. It's
all right. Look at that monster. That's going to mess us up. All right.
All right. Deep dark brown, rich and robust. It's got a dragon right on the bottle.
All right. So moving into the second half of the show.
Not cheap.
No.
Premium.
How
Imperial Stout, $44 Australian for a for this 750ml bottle.
By the time you start putting beer into a 750ml and putting a twist top on it, you shouldn't get much change.
High fermentation, secondary fermentation, contains 4 times more malt than a lager. There you go.
I'm sure. Well, that's a selling point, but there it is. Okay.
Steenberg.
Yep, and we'll give you our opinions on it once we've actually drunk a little bit of it,
or we chewed our way through it.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, you got to admire. So, as I said, John had no idea what it was going to be. What beer can I get that'll just draw this episode together? A heavy beer, a super heavy beer. You don't get a 12% beer in.
Okay,
but it doesn't taste like it.
Let's revisit the poll, which at the moment is at 18 votes. Reckon super heavies are super awesome, 61%. Super stupid, 39%. And Victor's joined us from northern Sweden. Woke up in a panic, realizing he'd missed half the show. But we're here for the second half of the show, which is
Don't
where
worry.
things get loose and interesting.
And Sanguinius 5, yes, we might have some Kiwis lurking around who don't want to show themselves. And after the last week's All Black
They are
loss,
shy. They are shy creatures, Kiwis.
but we know you. We know you're there. We love you all, and thank you for joining us.
Now, in terms of other housekeeping, Oz Armour Fest 2024 has happened. Looks like it was great. People had a good time. But we are going to be there next year for 25.
Fingers crossed.
If we've got
all things stars line, but
yeah,
we're planning on it.
It's gonna.
It is firmly locked in unless the world ends and other things happen. But that is what we're going for.
Now the point is where you come in as the audience is that you can come to Cairns next year for Oz Armour Fest 2025.
And if you have a Totally Tank T-shirt,
we will buy you one beer
at the pub that we go to.
No more than one beer. But you will get that one beer, and also we will make sure there are plans every night after the Tank Festival for pubs to go to and sit around and talk to other tank nerds. Which the last time we were there in 2022
was hugely fun.
It worked immensely well.
We had people recognizing us in the crowd. We go, really? Do you recognize us? Well, yeah.
But we look. Last time the Chieftain came to 2 of our nights, we can't promise that's going to happen. But we're just saying there will be interesting people who know a lot about tanks coming along.
So Nicholas, if you're watching, look, love to have you there.
Yeah. We're not committing you to all of our pub nights though. Just being very clear. But you're welcome. And whoever else in the tank online community can make it to Cairns. If it helps to sell it, Cairns is it's a real international tourist destination. It's got the amazing access to the Great Barrier Reef. There's crocodile farms. There's rainforest. What do you even call them?
Tanks.
And there's tanks. And there's an incredible number of craft breweries for a town its size. So anyway, come to Cairns next year. Hang out with us. Watch tanks. It's going to be as good a holiday as you're going to get. Okay, what else we talk about? Some of the slides in the last half I threw in were for Ogre, which was a game that Steve Jackson Games came up with for playing an enormous, colossal science fiction tank the size of a football field. But also Bolo was a series of books which covered the idea of artificially intelligent super heavy tanks with quite quirky personalities. So there is some cultural fit in the world of the super heavies. Okay, and on that note, we're going to move on
to the new future of tanks, the M1.
That's
a name that's been around for 40-something years, but the M1 is still going to be the M1, even though America's new tank is
completely redesigned.
Yes, going from 73 tons with all the bits and pieces and
over 80 for the mine roller on it. But
I think it was only 73 with the mine roller, so all the bits and bobs and everything else, and it's going to get down to 60 tons. Now, I like when we were talking with the chieftain about it. He said, look, if they took out all the copper wiring, you'd save about 5 tons there. And I thought, that's insane. This thing has so much wiring in it that you'd save that much weight. But obviously it was made in the 80s and you needed all the wiring.
Well, I mean, sorry, I keep bringing up battleships, but they're very relatable to tanks. I think at the end of the biggest battleships, they had something like 30 tons of paint on the hull.
Oh yeah, you got to chip and paint, mate. Chip and paint. Otherwise, the rust gets in. And you can't. And you've also got to have something for your midshipmen to be doing while they're doing their first sea cruises. A case of going over the side, chip away the rust, and paint the hull. Because otherwise, they might get around and actually do something, and you can't have that.
So, but there is an issue that things like they've added a system and put a counterweight in to keep the turret balanced, and then they've added a system on the other side and put a counterweight on the other side. So there are, literally counterweights in the M1 as it currently existed that could be eliminated to, and still be in balance because there's so many of them.
So what we're talking about here is the future of the M1 Abrams.
With the A3 plan, because the SEP3 has been scrapped, and they said we don't want to make this tank any heavier.
The SEP4 has been scrapped.
Okay.
I think we've got the SEP3. They're scrapping the SEP4.
Yes, you're probably right. Yep.
Yeah. And, yeah, so who knows where they're going to go with that, but it'll be exciting. With a 30mm remote weapon station on top to blat away at any
but also
drones in the sky.
They're following the Korean K2 with electrothermal ignition of the ammunition. Which is, I mean, obviously the Koreans have pioneered this, but the idea that the tank gun is going to have a slower controlled detonation so that you get the maximum push through the full length of the barrel.
To end up with a maximum velocity, which means you can take out more, you can put more intelligence into the round and take out less propellant. So you might have the same size and weight, but it's got the gubbins actually around the round that leaves the barrel can do more things like turn along the flight path to its target to actually hit the same target or a different target as it's getting there at Mach whatever. But the point is that with it, because they've taken away less propellant, because they can use their less propellant to achieve the same speed using the thermal whatchamacallit?
Ignition.
Thermal ignition, that's the one.
So I mean, all the stuff is good, and
gubbins. They got gubbins.
Some gubbins. But there is a very important point that they are addressing, which is lessons from Ukraine. Although I would argue you didn't have to have Ukraine to learn these lessons, but it's definitely taught them that once a tank gets over 60 tons, the engineering effort required to keep it moving becomes a huge tell for your operations.
And the engineering recovery effort of saying, okay, we have a 70-ton tank stuck in the mud.
How do we move it out?
Yeah. Do we burn like the Germans with their the Tigers? Do we burn out a platoon worth of Tigers to try and recover one tank that just got stuck in the mud and have them all blown up, or do we have the ability to have a armored recovery vehicle there that can say, yeah, no worries, we'll just drag that out straight away, and it takes the REMI folks or RAMI folks or whoever else, or the engineering, a much shorter amount of time with a lot less hassle to drag that capability out of the mud than they would need. And having it inherent to the system, inherent to the organisation.
Sure, but the tactical bridging requirements are important because
it's only important in places that actually have rivers.
No, but even just ditches, you need to have the engineers ready to go, and they've got to have their formations of vehicles. And in this modern environment where everyone's got drones everywhere, a tank that doesn't need as much logistical support is giving you a lot more flexibility.
Again, ditches are only a obstacle when they're actually planned. If you're building your tank ditches, yes, they're an obstacle. But if you're doing it right, shouldn't be running into the enemy's main obstacles and bloody tank traps and
but
ditches.
My bigger point though is
go around them.
Like
where are we? Kursk?
Yeah. A lighter tank has more options, and you know, when the enemy is narrowing down where their effort needs to go, you know, an 80-ton tank, you've got very limited number of places it can go to.
Yeah, with your lighter tanks, you've also got
they're more vulnerable.
Yeah, they're more vulnerable. But if you can take the meat sacks out of the tank, then who cares if it's vulnerable? It's a cost, but it's not a vote loser.
I don't think anyone cares about tank crews these days.
Well,
I mean, the Russians and Ukrainians don't, and the Americans don't care that much.
No, I think they do. I really think what the Russians may not, but I think a lot of other people do. So if you can get an autonomous light tank doing the job, or even half the job of at 30 or 40 tons, doing half the job of a 60 or 70 ton main battle tank, then wow, and I'm sure there's a whole lot of savings that can be made there. There's a lot of ideas. Look, I'm sure a lot smarter people than us are having these thoughts and doing something with them and coming up with them. But if they're not, well, we're here and we're happy to provide our ideas for lots and lots.
Give us the money.
Not that we can be bought. Can we be bought? Yeah, we can.
Yeah, we can be bought. Sure. Yeah, I mean, we run ads. Anyway, so the Task and Purpose did a fun video, in the Chris Cappy style, which is, not super intellectual, but understandable. He's very
And
good.
engaging.
He's very good at being engaging.
Yeah.
About what they're looking for in the next M1, which fundamentally should really be an M2. It's going to be a totally different tank. The crew positions are changing. The engines change. It's a new tank.
But can they find another American tank general to name it after who doesn't have any lurking back issues?
Schwarzkopf.
H. Norman Schwarzkopf.
We'll call him Norman. That'd be fun.
Call it H.
Yeah. Oh, that'll work too.
Yeah.
All right.
Thermite drones.
Other interesting things we've seen. So, yes, the thermite drones that the Ukrainians are burning thermite from drones, because as we've noted in the past, there is an enormous...
Storm and Norman, that is a good name, yep.
Getting back to what we're talking about, the ridge lines with trees in them are where...
ridge lines, they're just a
tree line.
A tree line.
If there's a tree line, you dig your defences into there. And you get cover, and trees are awesome in general, and both sides in the Ukraine war have been digging heavily into them. So the Ukrainians have sent up some drones that are dropping thermite, and it's basically raining fire on the sky, hoping to burn out the Russians in these defensive lines. Now, Australia is a country that does a lot of backburning.
Otherwise, the whole country burns.
Yeah, in terms of fire management.
So if you cut the resources to your firefighting or rural firefighting, volunteer firefighting services, and they can't do the backburning, then when push comes to shove, and the climate is so tinder dry, the entire country catches on fire, a la 2019, 2020.
Yeah. Now, but the point is that instead of dropping thermite from the sky, what you do is basically ping pong balls with potassium permanganate and glycol in them, and you drop them out of, in Australia's case, we've used helicopters because we've had permissive environments and no one firing surface-to-air missiles at these helicopters. But you could do it out of a drone as well. These ping pong balls drop, and then the potassium permanganate mixes with the glycol, and it burns incredibly fiercely for about 2 minutes in the undergrowth. And that's where you want it. The Ukrainians, the thermite's spectacular, but you want to actually be burning into the undergrowth, and then the dudes in the trenches, they'll be running very fast. You'll get them out of those trenches in no time.
I was about to say, unless there's undergrowth in the trenches are the best place for them to be.
Yeah, but when the fire is starting to rage on all sides, you just don't want to be too around it.
Okay.
Anyway, so just a quick tip because the Ukrainian drones and the footage we've seen, it's spectacular that this fire is raining down from the sky, but in terms of actually starting the fire that will dislodge the troops, dragon's eggs, that's what you need. Tactical Gentleman's joined us from Netherlands. Thank you very much. Good to see you join us. Yeah. Okay. All right. What is next to discuss?
I'd like for you to talk about
the beer.
The beer. What do you think about the beer, John?
I am getting unbelievably pissed drinking it, Rob. So
it is heavy. It is a super heavy beer, but it's not such a strong flavour that don't like it, but it does have a bit of a kick of an aftertaste. I can't.
No,
malt.
It is a well-made Imperial Stout. An Imperial Stout just means it's very strong. 12%, fine.
Strong.
Yeah. And this one, with a stout, you've got so much malt backbone that you would expect the flavors not to be overwhelmed by the alcohol. So
I found the English version of it.
Yeah.
So, Golden Draken Imperial Stout is a limited edition brew from the noble line of Golden Draken beers, a beer characterized by its deep, dark color and its dry, delicious bitterness. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
I mean, it's a damn fine stout, but I wouldn't normally drink a 12% stout in a pint glass. But here we are, and we're having a good time.
Yeah.
Having
a good time.
Having a good time.
Drone hunting.
All right. Yes, Rob, can you talk about this for a second while I queue up the end video?
Oh, sensor balloons. Yeah. All right, so supposedly the Ukrainians are sending up great balloons that hover over the battlefields that rather than watching for where the drones are going and saying, okay, I can see the drone and I can figure out from what they're doing where the drone operators are, so that we can get counter drone operator drones going out and blowing up the drone operators rather than trying to take out the drones from the sky, because drones in the sky are really hard to hit because they move really fast. The sky is a really big place, and space, it's a really big, and
Space is really big.
Yeah, you think it's a long way to the shops, but so rather than that, you send your counter battery fire or counter drone fire to where the operators are, because they are meat sacks on the ground with only legs to probably move them around with, who are busily looking at a screen to seeing what their drone is doing.
A couple of rounds of 155mm will make them not be paying attention to their little goggles.
Yeah. So these balloons are going up and saying, yep, we can figure out where the operators are, and they are really easy to hit if they are in range, which the drones we're looking at probably only have a range of 7 to 10 kilometers, and 155 rounds have a range of up to 20 kilometers, 18 kilometers, something like that, 30 with the rocket assisted propellant.
Depends what you've done with them.
So those sort of fun things are happening in Ukraine at the moment, and that's drone. Yeah, anyway, Kursk is a bargaining chip. Well,
let's briefly dwell on the drones. It's interesting that some quite obvious things to us external observers have taken a while, and there's things like the Ukrainians are putting Android phones, thousands of them, on sticks just to listen, and so that then they can be the software can be observing bangs and say, it's louder next to that one and it's softer next to that one. You can really build up a picture.
I mean, my only issue with this might be is that
someone has to charge the damn things.
Well, with the FPV drones that the Ukrainians were having a lot of success with it at the beginning, and the Russians slowly got themselves into gear. Could that then turn and basically, if overwhelmed by numbers, could that same sort of thing happen on the other side of it, saying, is this going to be something that the Russians saying, oh, this is happening over here, how can we slowly scale it up from our side to get into the game?
Oh, the Russians can. I mean, everyone will be using sensors. I mean, you go back to what the Americans were doing on the Ho Chi Minh Trail in the 70s. Admittedly, much more expensive things, but you can put sensors everywhere, and then you need software to interpret it because no human can monitor all this, and then you deal with the biases, the software, and there's problems that come into this, but it's certainly interesting to see this stuff come out. Let's move on to Kursk.
Right. So the Ukrainians gone across the border, have established a foothold, and keep on expanding and expanding and expanding. Now, a month ago we thought, is it? Are they going to just go in, smash and grab, and run away again, or unless there's any sort of concerted effort against them? But guess what? There hasn't been any sort of concerted effort against the Ukrainians to try and dislodge them. There haven't been any sort of defensive lines so far that I've seen. I've heard about being built in front of them. So it's just the Russians are just putting forces in front of them and trying to hold various villages, slowing them down. But the Ukrainians are still finding ways to, as we said before, go around the established defenses and get to where they want to go. I mean, it's slow, but it's much faster than what the Russians are doing in eastern Ukraine.
But I mean, there is the issue that the Russians are just keeping all their force on eastern Ukraine, and
part of the ploy was probably to try and dislodge those forces and saying, hey, we're invading Russia and doing all this shit. Vlad, would you like to pull out these 100,000 troops from eastern Ukraine and actually go do something about it, and we can just pull back slowly, or you're going to keep on doing what you're doing and we'll keep on doing what we're doing and see who blinks first? Don't know. And look, Zelensky in this last week has probably come out and said it is a bargaining chip for if something happens and they need to start saying, okay, let's redraw the borders. Well, we've taken this part of Russia. Would you like to trade this part of Russia for this part of Ukraine, or so forth? So who knows?
And the rains are about to start. That's an October thing.
Depending on climate change, buddy, because wars happen because of climate change.
Yeah. But so between the rains and the winter, and there is the issue that the Russians are going to run out of T-62s to pull out of storage next year. you would think they're going to reach some sort of peace negotiation in the next 6 months.
Do you think they're going to do a factory recall of all the Indian T72s and T90s? Say, look, you got to send them back to Russia for a factory reset, and then those 2,000 tanks from India are going to end up back. Oh, while they're here, we're just going to take them out for some testing.
Mm-hmm.
I hope I haven't given anybody any bad ideas, but anyway,
well.
that could happen.
Now, just quickly, we want to talk about Tim Pool and Dave Rubin, and basically the Miami set of conservative podcasters have all been caught up in a scam when the Russians were paying them $100,000 per week.
Would we take $100,000 from the Russians?
Yeah, absolutely.
There we go, boys and girls.
But we will be transparent in our disclosure. We'll let you know. There will be signs. Yeah.
Great money signs.
100,000 per week, and they say, "Oh, we didn't know." Yeah. Anyway, it's hilarious. But what my personal view is that what the Russians were trying to achieve here weren't the disinformation of what whatever these twerps that they were giving the money to was. It was that they have now made a huge number of people be suspicious of everything. And you constantly see this. Anytime anyone is critical of American foreign policy online, someone comes in saying, "Oh, well, you're paid by Russia to do this," and that is going to go through the roof. In terms of, Adam Curtis's documentary, Hypernormalization, I would strongly recommend to anyone trying to make sense of this world. And this is a big step in hypernormalizing us in the West and making us just terrified of everything and successful. But I will happily say $100,000 per week, Rob. Like, we will produce this podcast on a weekly basis.
And drink a lot of beer. We'll get a liver replacement every 12 months.
It doesn't matter. 100,000 per week. We'll do it. We'll do 2 podcasts a week instead of 1 a month. We will do it for that kind of money. Come on. But the bigger issue is that you only get that money if you're saying things that wealthy people want you to say.
Yeah.
And you've got guys like Tim Pool.
We're saying things wealthy people want to say.
No,
I'm sure we are. I'm sure we are.
We
are the mouthpiece of the billionaires.
I hope we get paid for it then. I just don't know why you're pocketing the money, not giving me any. Yeah. Anyway.
How do you think I afford this beer, John?
There we go. All right, let's move on.
All right,
from
all
that.
good fun, boys and girls. Yeah. We're just moving on from that. Yeah, we don't get money.
Worth noting.
This is satire. Just remember, it's satire. Until they're paying us.
Yeah. Just worth noting in terms of military affairs around the world. The Houthis at the moment are in complete control of the Red Sea. The Americans have withdrawn.
Have they?
Yeah, and the Houthis have taken over oil tankers and setting fire to them. And I've got to just say that people worried about China invading Taiwan, if Yemeni rebels, the Houthis, who are the most desperate, skeletonized people on earth, can keep the US Navy out of the Red Sea, China trying to control the Taiwan Strait in the face of Taiwanese opposition, I just don't see it.
Yeah, but the thing is, the US Navy is not trying to get involved. It's one fight they're trying not to get into. I mean, they've stayed out of the civil war.
No, I mean they were in the fight, and then Biden said, "Oh, bomb the Houthis into submission." The Houthis were like, "Oh, you killed some of us." I was
about to say we've been bombed into submission for the last 15 years.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing else has changed. But the point being is that having a base in Djibouti right next door to the Chinese base in Djibouti, I still love that from the Sultan of Djibouti. He's saying, America, you've got a base there. I'm going to lease out this piece of land to the Chinese as well. And it's the only foreign-based base that the Chinese Navy have around the world because nobody else will do it. But you know what? It's right next door to America. So maybe that's why they don't want to go. So maybe China should sort out the Red Sea because a lot of their trade goes through there, and that would make them. Can you imagine what would happen if China sorted out the Red Sea and the Houthis?
I think the Chinese are too smart to try and take on the Houthis because.
But can you imagine what the issues that would cause for the West?
It's part of why the Chinese are trying to broker a peace deal in Ukraine because they just want to be like, we're the guys who can make stuff happen, and not like these clowns. Yeah. Anyway, Rob, what are your thoughts on this beer before we wrap up?
It is very tasty, a bit sweeter than I was expecting for an imperial stout.
I mean, stouts are always sweet, but
yeah, but it's sweeter than I was expecting. Anyway, look, one will do, that's for sure, because at 12%, it's one will do. Now, our poll has ended up at super heavies were super awesome, like this beer, at 64%, and super stupid 36%. So I'd like to say thank you very much to all our listeners, watchers, patrons, and everybody else. It was a bit of a different episode today, and I hope you enjoyed it, because we certainly did, and we'd like to share this with everybody and go from there.
And we will be back next month.
After John goes on his whirlwind holiday.
I'm spending 3 weeks in Bali and Lombok, but well, I have some things to say about how awesome that is. Anywho, folks.
And if anybody wants to throw in a suggestion as to what tank we do next, happy to take them.
Or let's just quickly talk about this. Admittedly, it's the arse end of the show. If you would like to be in the show, if you are a historian and author,
have strong opinions about tanks,
and
would like to talk about half an hour about it while drinking a beer with us,
let us know. If you're saying why isn't that me in that halftime break, let us know. We're open to it, ready to go.
Because we can talk to anybody, because we are wonderful people, and so are you.
To not foreshadow the next episode, because we haven't done it yet. Mother of Tanks, who is a very interesting person, has agreed to be on the show. Which will make our third woman on the show. Lottie Sheridan, and then hopefully if we can line up.
We've mentioned Sheridan. Has she actually?
No, she was in the show. We did the Sheridan episode. We interviewed her about being named after.
You might have.
Yeah, it was in the show.
There you go. There you go. 3.
Yeah.
I got to throw in here. My daughter is building a tank at school for me to be able to include in one of these episodes as well. So I'll interview her at some stage, and she can be the 4th.
Okay. All right. And on that note, we're heading out.
Thank you all.